Okay guys, so you've seen this image before, right? We talked about all the different components we need for color managed workflow. Well, we mentioned specifically about monitors, we talked about a hardware calibrator, but now it's time to talk about the ambient light. We kind of just mentioned it, but now we're going to devote this video to it entirely. Now, one thing I have to point out is that the topic of using ambient light to evaluate your prints and all that, it is a quite deep topic. And this DVD will not be the kind of DVD where I specialize just on that. And if you want to learn more, you're gonna have to try to look for more, specialized material and something that will suit your needs and your reading style on your own. And in this case, I'm just gonna give you like a brief overview of the things you need to take into account. Before we go in, I just also want to point out that ambient light does have a quite profound effect on your prints, how they view them or where the prints will be viewed, and it can even have quite profound effect on how your monitor displays color, because it can spill over into your monitor. So if you were to see your print on a, let's say, a standard incandescent light, it might appear yellowish or more darker, even because it may not be the very strong light. And if this is the only thing in the room, the brightest thing, your eyes will adjust, right? But if you were to compare it to more fluorescent light bulb, which is, let's say, daylight balanced, you might see something that looks more whitish, or a lot of times if you compare it directly will look more bluish and possibly even brighter depending on how close it is to the light bulb. And this is true not only for artificial light but also for daylight. Natural light, even cloudy, can be different than sunny. So as you can see, we have to take into account where the print will be viewed, and especially when we are comparing it with our results on screen. So let's say that this is your monitor, right? Well, first we're going to talk about the working ambient light, and this is very important to distinguish. A working ambient light is not the same, or should be the same, as the one where we use for comparing our prints or evaluating our prints. A working ambient light should be dimmer than the monitor. And to give you a reference point, I'm going to put the monitor on the table. And speaking of tables, if you have a chance, if you have an option, it would be a good idea not to use this kind of a table, which is very bright in color, very saturated and very reflective, but something like this, more matte surface, more neutral gray, less reflective, less color contamination because it's more gray. And let's say you calibrate your monitor to about 120 candelas per meter square for luminance, and let's say that your white point is set to 6500K or D65, for example, which is kind of like quite a bit of standard options or settings. Let's say this is your light, right? Well, your light should be, and this is only for working environment, right? Should be dimmer than the display, something like this, about 50%, maybe even 60% less than the monitor. And the idea is that if your monitor is the brightest thing in the room, then your eyes will adapt to that white point, to that, how bright it is and what color it is, based on these two settings. And it will map all the other colors accordingly. This is very important because since we're working, we need to have that as a reference point, main reference point. If your light is, as we saw before, let's say equal or even brighter than your monitor, problem with that is that then your white point it's harder to see things in the shadows, for example, when you're working on your screen. And if it's reflecting all the other elements, let's say your room is not neutral gray, but it's more like this, then what's going to happen is some of that light is going to reflect, and it's going to affect how you perceive color on your screen. And we've seen that happen, right? So the idea is instead that we go with the dimmer light like this, and if it can even be the different white point, it can be different temperature setting. Now the thing you might do in that case is use a hood for a monitor to protect your monitor from the ambient lights being spilled over into your monitor. But let's say you're working with D65 on your monitor, you might have that kind of a light bulb for working in environment. And even if you have 5000 or D50, you may have that kind of light bulb. Otherwise, you should probably try to protect your monitor by using a hood. Now you can use a hood, you can build your own if you know how, or you can just Google for it, or you can buy one specifically for your monitor. Now also, it would be a good thing that your lighting, especially working lighting, is as consistent as it can be. So the daylight, from a window isn't the best option because the daylight changes over time. We just saw how during the sunny or cloudy day it can change, from sunset to from sunrise to sunset and so on and so forth. Cloudy day, not cloudy day, and things like that. And it shouldn't directly be behind your monitor, behind where you're working, because it will reflect on your monitor. So use artificial lighting and make it consistent as you can. Also, if you are done with working and now you're, let's say, trying to compare your print, one good idea to do would be, if you're serious about it, would be to use something like a Solax daylight full spectrum lamp. Now they are daylight balanced, but unlike fluorescent lamps, Solax are full spectrum, pretty much, which means that they display color on your print more accurately. It will be more even, and they're actually so good, and they're they have a quite high quality. And I think that Solax as the company have patented their way of doing that. So now some of their lamps are being used in museums and for displaying jewelry when you need to accurately present your product in the best way possible. So you might get one for yourself, and they're quite expensive, and maybe $100 or more. So go to solax.com and check out what do they offering, what will suit you if this is what you want. And unfortunately, you can't change here the what the temperature is, but you can do that on your screen in order to match one and the other. And as far as how bright the light is hitting your print, you can try to do that by moving a lamp away from the print or closer, or moving your print away and closer. So it's kind of like not the most expensive solution, but it's decent enough for many users. But if you really want to go deep, you might try something like this, where you get your monitor and your viewing boot for prints, and the viewing boot may have an option to adjust the luminance and the white point and all that stuff. So what I would suggest is, if you're really serious and you have a lot of money and all that, to invest in something like this, and then you can judge one and the other. If you're, let's say, a fine art printer, a photographer who prints their own work on wide gamut printers, you're gonna spend a lot of money anyway, so this might be another good investment. But this is pretty much beyond the scope of a traditional retoucher or freelance retoucher, so I'm not gonna go that big into it. And if you're working in-house, they're probably going to have something similar, or they're gonna be inclined to go in that direction more than if you were just a freelancer working somewhere in the world. So that's why I won't go too deep into it. But basically, once you have something set up like this, then you would massage one and the other and try to get a print to screen match. And that's pretty much what you need to take into account regarding your ambient lighting. And oh yeah, by the way, some people might have a dark prints, which is a quite common problem, and there's a lot of potential problems regarding that. But one of the things is that they are viewing the print under wrong lighting, and sometimes the lighting is okay, but the monitor is way too bright. Because remember, if you don't adjust your monitor properly, if you don't calibrate it properly on proper settings and adjust it, then your monitor is not designed for this print type of work, right? It's more multimedia type device, and as a result, it's not that your print is too dark, but it could be that your monitor, your display, is too bright. So you need to adjust one to match the other. So in the next video we'll talk about what settings to choose, but just so you know, that's one of the potential problems. Also, if you can match them and you still have an issue, you might also use techniques, quite often we see that, where you soft-proof your image and then you create a temporary file for just printing, and you compensate for what you see on your monitor to match the print. And you basically prepare your file not for viewing on screen but specifically for print, so that the print eventually matches the screen. And we'll talk about that when we get to soft proofing and all that stuff, just so you know.